Good evening and welcome, friends. If this is your first time on the front line, we welcome you. If you are a returning family member, welcome back. My name is Tiffany Flowers. I'm the campaign manager of the front line. I use she, her pronouns. I have kind of long, sandy brown locks. I'm wearing colorful glasses, a bright red lip. There are some sunflowers behind me. I have on a black shirt and some really kind of wild and busy, hard to explain glasses. So, again, thank you for joining. And let's just talk really quick about who the Frontline is. The Frontline is a joint campaign between the Movement for Black Lives, the Working Families Party, United We Dream, and the Rising Majority. We were born out of a response to 27 million people who hit the streets in the summer of 2020, in the wake of the George Floyd murder, who were looking to stay politically engaged and learn more about making sense of each of the moments that we're living in. And so tonight we're going to have a talk about women in labor, what's happening, what's happened, and the future. And before we get started, just want to name that ASL interpretation is available on screen throughout the program, and you can find access to Spanish simultaneous interpretation calling the number at the bottom of your screen. Okay. So, why are we talking about women in the labor movement? Well, because women are the backbone and have been at the forefront of labor organizing for quite some time. I have a past in labor organizing. I made many friends. I've organized the Bernie Sanders campaign, Lipton Tea, um, and several other locations around America in my years at AFSCME, SEIU, and the United Food and Commercial Workers Union. And tonight we're so lucky to be joined by this amazing panel of women who've had illustrious careers in labor currently, formerly, and and they're going to talk about the work that they've done and also how that work informs the work that they do now. So without any further ado, it is more than my pleasure to welcome Tamara, Carmen, and Rosa. Friends, welcome. Please give yourselves an introduction. Tell the people who you are. And I'm going to start with you, Tamara.
Thank you, Tiffany, and thank you to the Frontline for having me. My name is Tamara Brummer. I use she, her pronouns. I'm based in Washington, D.C., and I'm a senior advisor for an organization by the name of Demand Justice. And we focus on making sure that the federal judiciary absolutely is for the American people and not just for the wealthy elite and the Republican puppets. I am a light-skinned Black woman. I have on a colorful turban, a bold red lip, little earrings, and my earbuds, and a couple of gold chains, and a black shirt. And I'm really glad to be here this evening and be a part of this conversation.
Thanks, Tamara. Rosa, welcome to the front line. Again, you've done stuff with us before.
Yeah, I'm excited to be back. Thanks, Tiff. I'm Rosa Lozano. I'm with the National Domestic Workers Alliance. I'm their affiliate and campaigns engagement coordinator based in DC. I am a short, light-skinned Latinx woman, curly, dark brown hair. I'm wearing dark framed glasses with a green suede sweater. Um, and lots of messiness I hope you don't all see in the background. And pronouns are she, her, ella.
It's a well lived in house, Rosa. And we should mention Rosa is a working mom who's organizing through the pandemic with a toddler. So just to have you here today is a joy, and we thank you. Carmen
Shout out to
Berkeley,
the moms.
shout out to the working moms. Carmen Berkeley, how are you today? Welcome back to the front line.
Hi, hello. Carmen Berkeley, she and her. My day job is I'm the vice president of programs for a foundation called Group Health Foundation based in Washington State, currently living in Seattle. I am a brown skinned Black woman with curly braids, and I have on like a beige top that's got some nice shoulder fluff happening, and I'm in a hotel room, so there's not much happening behind me, but I am here excited.
Yes, yes, we are. And these descriptions, I mean, a suede sweater, two chains, and fluff sleeves. The girls brought it for you all today, so we're in for a treat. I'm gonna get started with my first question. And last month we talked about bell hooks, and so we asked everybody, when did you first fall in love with bell? I'm gonna ask each of you in love and hip hop style, when did you fall in love with labor? What was your first experience that drew you in? I'm gonna start with you, Tam.
Oh, that's a really good question. I was a freshman in college and I went to a Jesuit school, predominantly white institution. And I was drawn to the university because they had a mantra about being men and women for others. And I thought that, yes, I'm going to go here. I'm going to learn so much. I'm going to change the world. It's going to be amazing. And then, like the first week there, the food service workers were organizing a union and learned very quickly that this facade of being an institution of higher learning and developing and shaping minds was also a major drive for economic inequality in my city, and that the most immediate impactful way to bring about change for those workers was by joining a union, and that they needed students, particularly Black students on campus, to be a part of that fight, because the food service staff was all Black, mostly all Black women, who have kind of taken us in, right, as our aunts and mamas. At one point, I didn't even have a meal plan, but I definitely ate. Right. So these folks really shaped our lives too. They're such an important part of the educational system. And so for the 4 years that I was at university, they organized the union and negotiated their first contract. And that for me was the very first time that I realized the kind of immediate impactful change, coming together and working towards a collective vision can bring about change in people's lives. So you can go from making minimum wage to be able to take your first vacation. And for some people that means nothing, but for a lot of people that means everything. And that is just a taste of what organizing can do for us and for our communities. And so that's where the bug for the labor movement bit me.
I know that's right. And what's so interesting about what you said, I just thought about like, and I'm sure all of you can remember organizing campaigns where you saw not only the transformation in the workplace, but the growth that happened with individuals, right? And like what that campaign meant, particularly to women finding their voices in so many ways. And so I can understand where that love came from. What about you, Miss Berkeley? When did you fall in love?
Well, I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and so Steel City, we are tight when it comes to labor, and I'm very indebted to the labor movement. Honestly, almost everybody in my family is connected back to labor. My mother has been a part of her union for 40 years, so I do feel like I grew up with the union sensibility. But I think when I fell in love, when I was at the University of Pittsburgh, I got hooked up with an organization called the United States Student Association. They are incredible, and they have a very tight relationship with Jobs with Justice. And so USSA and Jobs with Justice had this program called Student Labor Action Project. And I just always thought they were so cool. Like the way that they were doing their trainings, they were talking about a lot of what Tam just said around like who on your campus is actually in a union, who's not in a union, who is being respected and has rights, who doesn't. When they would come in and do these trainings, I wanted to be them because I felt like, wow, if you all could be on our campus basically giving us this level of education, like what does that actually look like when the people who are working in these jobs feel empowered to say what they need to say or do what they need to do to get their wages, get their safety, and get their protection? So honestly, through what I felt was like some cool organizers, it honestly led me into my career to working at United States Student Association and later in labor. So I'm very indebted to the Student Labor Action Project, Jobs with Justice, and United States Student Association.
Shout out to Jobs with Justice. Shout out to Erica Smiley, Sarita Gupta, Scarlett Jimenez, Carlos. So many dope organizers. And that's just to name a few. Blame it on my head, not my heart, y'all. You know, I love my J with J family. Um, so yeah, Rosa, that's part of our origin story of the J with J crew and how we kind of came up in DC. So when did you fall in love with labor?
Yeah. I feel like it was kind of like a birthright a little bit for me. My dad was a union organizer with SEIU, at that time, Local 82. He was part of the Justice for Janitors campaign in the 90s here in DC. So I was exposed to trouble, good trouble, from a very young age. And so I think I was always, and, it being kind of a natural connection to his and my mom's origin of being like refugees, having been freedom fighters in El Salvador during the Civil War there. So it just like kind of came with this like innate connection and commitment to justice. And I think that was a natural kind of pipeline for them to go into. He went into labor organizing and she went into community organizing, um, specifically around like immigrant rights. And so like I think I kind of came at the crux, right, of like immigration and labor. But I think that myself, I kind of as like a autonomous, conscious individual, um, same as Carmen and Tam in college. I went to University of Maryland, and I was involved with United Students Against Sweatshops, and got really engaged in corporate greed campaigns, specifically like Russell Athletics, Nike. Um, and their connections to sweatshops in Central America. And so I think kind of seeing the connections of like the like commercial and like distribution, chain, and kind of all the like domino effects, right, that process has both on like workers here in the United States and abroad. And so I think that experience of working with workers that had been, risking their lives in other countries to achieve rights that are more accessible to us here, depending on who you are here in the U.S., I think just kind of struck me, and I think I caught the bug, and I was like, I really want to dedicate my life to like making, to adding my grain of salt to this, right?
Shout out to movement babies, raising one right now. And what they end up being in the world and in our movements. Yes. And to your parents, I don't know your dad so well, but I know your mom is a beloved community member in Washington, D.C., who has had such an impact on the greater community. So shout out to your family, Rosa, from one struggle to another. And they really brought it to D.C. So sticking with you, Rosa, I'd like for you to share a little bit about the kind of campaigning and work that you're doing and leading right now. And then, because you are the person on the panel right now who is still holding a significant role in the labor movement, could you talk to the challenges, right, of being a woman in this movement, in this work right now?
Yeah, this is such a deep question. I think I still doing this. No, I think so. I think for me, like the the way that I look at my experience within the labor movement is like multifaceted, right? There's like my experience within like labor unions, my experience with worker centers, and my experience now with the National Domestic Workers Alliance, right? And they've all been very different. And I think for me, part of the attraction to be where I'm at now is that one, it's an organization that's led by women, predominantly women of color, that I think have an extremely relevant um, perspective to bring to the crisis that we're in, both economically and I think socially, right? Coming out of like having, a white supremacist in the White House and having, a society where, extremism has been emboldened, and what that has meant for me as like a three-dimensional person, right? That I feel like the work that I do now fully embraces and I think makes me a stronger organizer. And so I think for me, what I've been working on right now, especially within the context of the pandemic, has been like one, providing like real material support for house cleaners, childcare providers, home care workers that have really, carried the brunt of the burden brought on by the pandemic, right? Having to care for others, or provide services to others to make their work possible, right? Many of them even frontline essential workers, right? And also having to do that for themselves and their families unpaid, right? And so like really seeing that disproportionate um, weight, right, that has fallen on them, working really hard to give whatever support that we can, especially given that it's an industry that's like underpaid and undervalued because of who does it, because it's predominantly women, because it's predominantly Black and women of color, that who, an industry that has its roots in slavery, right? And that has been excluded from a lot of labor protections and therefore is extremely deregulated, and underpaid, right? And so like under this, pandemic, that all was exacerbated and kind of like amplified. And so it was an opportunity to really socialize the public about what domestic workers really face on a day to day, and like an opportunity to like together raise the alarm of how and the urgency of having to raise standards, and quality of life for these workers. So it's been busy, but that's been kind of like the guiding light, right, for this work that has made it super fulfilling. I think the thing that makes it hard generally is that like everything's stacked against us, right? Like we're not coming from a place of power, like we're fighting power, right? Like we're fighting the status quo. And I think that that's always, to come from that is really hard because you're essentially trying to dismantle something that's not working and replace it with something that is the alternative. So it's like your responsibility to like project your vision of what how things could work better, but also having to like you break down like the systems that have been around for a long time that have a self-interest in self-preserving itself, um, and that sometimes also allies that are involved in kind of making another world possible also having conflicting interests, right, in that journey, right, of like of empowering a subset of workers. So I think that's the biggest thing, is just the terrain, right? It's like the political conditions right now are not um, naturally in place to like allow for this change to happen, and definitely not for this change to happen quickly. And that's what we need right now, right? Given kind of like the state of things.
I mean, just like an organizer, to keep it on the workers and the struggle and not touch on the personal. And I get it, Rosa, but I think that's real, right? I think that it's very real. Um, all of the conflicts that we face as organizers, and then we have to not only face them and fight them, but help people make sense of them, as well as try to live in this world, as you so duly noted, as these three-dimensional people who also want to bring balance and want to bring justice and want to have peace and want to, it is seemingly an insurmountable challenge, but I do want to shout out orgs like NDWA because they are North Stars in these movement in this movement. With the lens of care and relief, and I surely know it's like the drum I've been beating on for years now, that like it's probably is the only way in my theory of change that we get out of this, and demonstrating care and relief, raising awareness about who provides it, who gets the least of it, and how we redistribute it so that everybody has a chance to actually recover and deal with the trauma that we've been through. And the fact that you guys are prioritizing that work for women, for Black women, is it's a North Star. So thank you. I'm sure it isn't easy work every day, but thank you all, and thank you for your leadership, Rosa.
Thanks to
Of course. Um, so I want to move on to Carmen and Tam because we're lucky enough to have folks here who are currently working in labor like Rosa, but the wisdom of women like yourselves who played significant roles in labor not too long ago. And so I want to touch on Um, and this is going to be a tough question. I want to touch on what made it hard to stay and what made it hard to leave. I have my own story, and I know it wouldn't be easy for me to share or tell, but I'm going to ask you guys to do something that I don't know if I could do. So, Tim, what made it hard to stay?
First off, I just want to recognize for the folks watching at home, there was this moment, at least in like international unions, where young Black and brown people were not just leading, but driving the program and driving like big tent labor. Like it's, as a person who, like, my whole professional career was in the labor movement before my current job, to be like one of the last things to get to do is to work with these women here and a couple of other dynamic women of color. I just don't like the conversations we're able to have now about the labor movement is because of the work that the women here on this thing are doing, have done and are doing, and others around us. I just want to name that. Like, you know, we wouldn't be talking about Starbucks workers if it wasn't for the work that the women on this panel had done before. We wouldn't be talking about, you know, tech workers and gig workers organizing if it wasn't for the vision of the women who are on this call right now. So I just want to name that. We are living history, and some of us have taken that. What makes it hard to leave the labor movement. What made it, I don't even know if this is the right question, what made it easy to leave is because it was no longer a space where that type of vision was acknowledged. I won't say rewarded, but like funded and supported. And so for me, COVID hit, and it became very clear to me that the work that the work that I was doing at the union I was at was a reflection of the larger movement. And this is Big Tent labor, right? Like, I think what was also key is that Rosa works at a place with workers who have not been a part of the big labor movement, that the big labor movement has pushed aside, but has decided that they're going to organize regardless, right? And so recognizing that we're in a moment of crisis, like this is the moment, you know, I remember March of 2020 being like, they're about to shut down everything and they want people to go back to work without protections, without a clear vision. So that made me nervous. Then the video of George Floyd was released. And once again, the labor movement was flat-footed and unprepared. We have been here before, right? That's what made it so hard. And some of the women who we're talking to today were at like the AFL-CIO in those other previous moments, had done amazing groundwork. And so here we are a few years later, had this same moment, and we're confused, having the same conversations. What do we need to do? Where do we need to go? And you know what? I felt like LeBron James, I'm going to take my talents and skills elsewhere, because I want to take my talents and skills at a place where they're ready for those talents and skills. You know, one of the biggest lessons I've learned for the work that we've done, about the labor that we put into building a strong labor movement, is that I have talents and skills as well. I'm also a worker. I am a laborer. And that if you're not prepared for that labor, then you can't receive me, and that's okay. I will go where I can be received and where I can do the work that I'm destined to do. And so I felt that although I worked in some of the best unions, some of the strongest unions, some of the largest unions, with some of the most dynamic people, the movement at that moment was no longer ready, was not able to hold my talents and my skills. And that there is work that needed to be done, and that I wanted to do that work regardless if it was there or somewhere else. And I think that the other thing that makes it kind of, you know, that made it hard to leave is that the folks who are on the front lines who are dying in COVID are our neighbors and our moms and our dads and our uncles and our aunts. When I talk to my white peers, they haven't been hit by COVID the same way. But I'm telling you, if you talk to the folks on this call right now, to us right here, we all have a personal story. I know of it, of someone we know and love who's died from COVID, and it could have been preventable. And so when you work in places where you know that is supposed to be our North Star, and we're so distracted from that, it doesn't help me I can't sleep at night, and I can't be rested to do this fight if I can't be where I need to be. And so I just felt like those two moments in 2020 made it very clear that I needed to be somewhere where my vision aligned with the vision of the work.
I'm just gonna sit with that. I got a little teary because the point of this conversation, right, was to not just examine, send recommendations, hope that this gets back to the people that need to hear it, but also to recognize and to give flowers to my peers and the very impactful, very special work that you all did, that we all did together, and how, had we been empowered and respected and funded, and it could have been there. Like the tears, honestly, are for what could have been, right? To be completely honest, because that moment was so magic, and I hold on to it. I hold it so dear. It's why we are all so dear to each other. And you just nailed it, Tam. Everything in my heart. You really just spoke to it, and it hit me exactly in that tender, soft place where all those memories truly live, and all of the work that could have been, and all the possibilities, right? So thank you. If you're ready, Miss Berkeley.
I am. I
Ready?
just I Tam spoke for me, honestly, and I feel the emotion that you have, Tiff, and I don't want to cry, not because I don't want to, but because I feel that I literally will just I will never stop crying for what Tam just said. We were recruited into the labor movement. I was minding my own business, working in other nonprofits, and I was recruited to AFSCME International, working in their digital department. Some people don't even know that, and those were a hard 6 months. I was on the comms team, and they were still challenging because I think that, like many of you, people are attracted to our personalities. They're attracted to the things that we say, but they're not necessarily so attracted to the level of intellect, the amount of study, and that we are folks, even as Rosa said, we are students of this because of who our families are, because of who our parents are. This is not existential to me. It's very like tangible. And so, at least for me, later in my career, when I went off to run the civil rights department at the AFL-CIO, what made it insufferable was that we had the smallest budget. Women make up more than 50% of the workforce. There are so many. I could just do a whole list. Black people, Latinx people, Asian people, Pacific Islanders, LGBTQIA people that wanted to be together. And all of us that were working there at the time were creating this inertia. We would bring people together, have these beautiful trainings, these beautiful conferences, these beautiful campaigns. And it's almost as if when we were walking in, that was the thing that made you want to be there. It was energy. It was electric. It was fire. I remember one time in the what was it called, the Gompers room at the AFL-CIO, perhaps.
Wow, we cut a fool in that room so many
times. In this room named after this white man. We were having events with NFL players, talking about Black hair, talking about immigration, talking about undocumented workers, talking about the car washeros. We were really pushing the edge. And at a time in American history, at least when I was working there, when American history was a true disappointment. Mike Brown, Trayvon Martin, Charleston, there were atrocities that were happening at the border. And still, we were able to build this thing across many unions, across many states and cities internationally, that felt like electricity.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why it was hard and easy to leave was because at the time we were not allowed to talk about what is now commonplace language, which was white supremacy practices and behaviors at the top of every single union. And while there are incredible people that work at the top of every single union, that are fighting for every single dollar that the majority of us have made, for whatever reason, there's this system that was allowing this like shadow government of people to prevent us from doing our job best. And it was painful to watch. And it was painful to watch people who had literally, 40, 50 years in their jobs. At the UAW, at UFCW, working their butts off, can't get into leadership, even though they've got a beautiful vision. And I think for me, the greatest disappointment of my life was when Trump was running for president. We worked at the AFL, so we were right across the street from Obama land. And I'm not saying that the Obama administration was perfect, because it wasn't.
Oh, ma'am.
But the energy in DC felt different. The energy at our job felt different. So I was looking for the unions to be like, by any means necessary, we will not let this person who hurts working people and people of color for real and women to come into office. And I feel like they sold us up the river. And there's a picture that I will never forget, which had Trump, the president of the AFL-CIO, and the comms director with their thumbs up at Trump Tower in New York. And for me, that was that was moment number one. Moment number two, and I know you all remember this, we all almost got in trouble for real because we were standing with the workers and the folks that were associated with the Keystone Pipeline. And we were saying, hey, we're actually in alignment with tribes. We're in alignment with other people of color. We're in alignment with actually like movement right now. And we got scolded at our job for standing with the folks that were in the Dakotas. And for me, I said, you know what? I'm not going to have my name on this, because in history, you all are wrong. You're wrong. And I will not be your puppet. And neither will the rest of these people. So if I leave, you don't have to kick me out of the labor movement. I'll leave willingly. But I know that if I leave, and if Tam leaves, and if Rosa leaves, that's going to send a signal to a whole bunch of other people. So when I think about my relationship to labor, I want to be in the labor movement. That's where my heart is still sitting. But as Tam said, I know that I and we have other skills, and there are other people that really appreciate that love and that passion. And so there are many people who hope to come back home, but are missing because of that mistreatment.
Carmen Berkeley, the work you did in the Women in Civil Rights Department will never, ever be forgotten. They'll never take it from you. They'll never take your leadership. They'll never take your brilliance. They'll never take, don't touch my hair. Don't touch my hair at the AFL-CIO as a workplace safety issue, ma'am. They'll never take that away from you, Carmen. They'll never take Tiffany Lofton, nor so many other Nady, who couldn't be here today but was invited, and blessings to her family right now. But Rosa was there. We know, we the family knows, and that's what matters. And we'll always love and admire you. The report you put out, the effort, the brilliance, like, again, the list goes on and on. But that's why, like you said, make the house welcoming and I'll come home.
To that point, because I had to go back to the AFL for something. I was a part of another union. And, that report that Tiffany talks about, that Carmen birthed and like shepherded through to the AFL around like racial inequality, all these great things. That report came back, right? It came back. They was asking like, oh, we've got a report. And then I was like, well, that's interesting, because when I worked here, we also had the same report. So I want to know, what are we going to do to implement this report? I never got invited back to calls, y'all. Because the thing is that like I said, so like Carmen and like Nady were building something in that institution. Jamal were building something in that institution that they still get to leverage till this day. And then I think that is something that's just a testament to the labor movement in general in our country, right? Like, we don't get labor rights until Black women decide that we're going to fight, right? And then everyone else gets the benefit. And that's where we're at once again. We're continuing where we're at.
Carmen, they can't take it away, my love. They'll never, ever, ever take it away. And you did. And shout out to Kevin Burnett. And shout out to Lee Anderson. And shout out to the beautiful graphics and the Martin Luther King, the legendary Martin Luther King Day weekend.
I miss those days. I mean, that's what I mean by, an energy. And to me, that is actually, when I think of the labor movement, that's what's stuck in my heart. Nothing else other than it can look multi-generational, it can look very diverse, it can look like a party, and it can also look like a fight. And I think that that is what a lot of the uppers at the institutions are fighting against. Why they're fighting against our collective joy and freedom, I am not sure, but I do know that this time in history will not be kind to them, because there were some unions that had the opportunity to stand away from white supremacy, and they walked right on up towards the door. And that's why there are organizations like the domestic workers that have said, there's a different way, and maybe we're not perfect, but we're going to try to operate in a different way. And that's why they get blessings on blessings on blessings.
Amen. Rosa, I'm going to ask you, as somebody, Carmen, Tam, and I all have the have the looking in the rear view mirror view of this conversation, right? Like, driving away, but you're dead in the middle of it. You're in the thick of it. And as Tam noted, you're not under like big tent labor, but you're in the movement. You're definitely in the labor movement. And you're, like you said, you're dealing with not just organizing, but organizing around care, relief, direct support, a lot of trauma. So what makes it hard for you to stay as a working mom and a wife and all the things that you are? Hard to leave, hard to stay.
Yeah. I mean, I might not be looking back in the rear view, but the side view mirror, like I feel like, because it's a different world to be at the National Domestic Workers than it was to be at the AFL-CIO, than it was to be in the building trades. Like, Tam, myself, and Nady were the only women of color under the age of 35 that had ever worked at the Painters Union in organizing. Like, before us, there had been no women of color that had worked in that department. And like, in an industry where more women are coming to work, it's like, that is night and day to being in an organization that is led by, represents women, right? And predominantly Black and women of color. So like, I do think it's like, I have been able to reflect, and it almost is like when I transitioned from union labor organizing and came to NDWA, it was almost like not PTSD, but it was a recovery process of like working in an environment where my full self was appreciated and actually tapped into, as opposed to like suspected or like undervalued, and like, especially becoming a new mom, like that was a huge struggle and like a huge identity crisis for me, being in a male dominated industry and union where there hadn't even been a parental leave policy before I was pregnant. I was 6 months pregnant when the policy was created for us, like, so, and that was thanks to Nady's leadership within our union, right? So like, I do feel like, listening to Carmen and Tam and I've been we've all crossed paths among our different um, trajectories within the labor movement in our careers. And I think the common thing is that our bonds are so strong because we have battle scars. And that's like amazing and also so sad that like trauma is what bonds us, and like, I think that when I look back at key moments where labor showed up right, one of you was behind it. And it was like, and it only happened despite like leadership, not embraced by leadership. Like there weren't moments that like leadership was like, yes, come on in, like do that, save us from ourselves. It was like fighting tooth and nail to make those things happen. And the reason we made them happen is because what was important for us is what should be important, which is working class people, right? And like knowing that like this is not the real fight. The real fight is happening on the streets, on the jobs where people are like completely unprotected, where people are being targeted, maybe not in their jobs, but they're being targeted because of who they are on the way home or even in their homes, right? And so like I think that was a reality that we all understand because of who we are, that leadership in major union leadership don't. Um, and the way that these institutions function is that it's like kingdoms, right? It's like people inherit these positions and they all look the same and they all come from the same background. And so nothing really changes. And so like it's not surprising that we're continuing to have, you know, discussions and struggles that other women of color had earlier on, you know, in the labor's history, right? And so like I think that's why like for me, you know, it was like for me, labor still remains like one of the only spaces which workers can go toe to toe with employers and create real impactful material change, right? Um, but I do think that the opportunities, even though they are many, especially under the current conditions, um, the people that are supposed to usher, you know, those workers into this broader movement of support and empowerment aren't doing that. And it's always this constant like risk analysis as opposed to an analysis of power, right? Like power mapping. Like what do we need to be stronger? We need members. How do we get members? We become the most inclusive possible institution that we can be. And we acknowledge that workers are not just workers, that they have all these other identities that need to be taken into account when we're thinking about campaigns, right? When we're thinking about whatever, you know, challenges, whatever pressure that we're trying to build, be it, you know, organizing, be it political, because I think you need both, but like that's not really valued the same or viewed the same. And so like, and I think that it's part of a miscalculation of how much value is placed on what workers can do. And I don't think that's fully like, you know, I don't think that's like a one person or one, like I don't think there's like a singular fault, right? Like I think it's like I think we live under a capitalist system that exploits everything it can from working people, us including as organizers. And our institutions also replicate very similar exploitative practices. And that does not exclude worker centers and it does not exclude the National Domestic Workers Alliance. It's why a lot of you know organizations are unionizing, you know, staff as well. But I think that, you know, it's like it's so we're replicating this and so it's like it's all enmeshed and so it's like really hard then to be the example of like how things can be different, and definitely in a sustained way, and so I think for me like being a mom, being younger, being a Latinx woman, like I think that comes into everything I do. And like, you know, thinking about what Carmen and Tam have said, it's like one of the things that I always think about is like people, you know, like we have our own personalities, like we're very like imposing or like um not aggressive, but like we take initiative and like that's welcomed when it's convenient, right?
Mm,
And it's welcomed when it's external. But when it's internal, it's a much different thing. And it becomes extremely inconvenient and it becomes extremely uncomfortable. And then it becomes about you're just not one of us. Like you're not, you don't come from our trade. You're an outsider. And so it's like, but if that's true about me and I'm an organizer, then what does that say about the membership that's changing. So like they're not part of you either because they do come from a trade, but they don't look like you. And they don't sound like you. So like I think that there's just like a weird wall of like exclusivity that like really does keep us at these institutions from actually changing in a way that could be so empowering and emboldening in this moment. And it's like sad because it's like such a missed opportunity, and like working people are always going to exist. I don't know that we can say that about unions,
Mm.
and like how sad would that be, right? That all this power that's been generated could just fall apart because people are afraid to really open the doors and let people in who might have new perspectives or like new ideas because they aren't from that, right? And that what would it look like if bread and butter issues were actually bread and butter issues to working people, right? Not just the economy, but race, not just the economy, but gender, like those are the things that keep me up at night because I'm just like, man, so much is possible if you would only let it happen. And so like, yeah, like I think that's what drives me. Again, I think we said it already, like no one has a silver bullet of like, this is how you organize working people and this is how you build power. We struggle with it too on the worker center side, but at least we're trying things that are different. And I think like that's the piece. It's like it might fail, but we tried, and then we'll move on and we'll learn something else, right? And then that's the piece that I don't see manifesting in the places that have all the resources, but are too afraid to use it because there's this like weird hyper vigilance around like accountability to membership. And it's like, yeah, but to certain things, right? Because it's like you can spend money on other things that don't mean shit and aren't going to generate any power. But are you going to spend money on the things that count to protect workers that maybe aren't part of your union but are part of your industry and it's going to mean like improving conditions across the board in this industry? Like that's not good for all of us, including your members.
Well, Rosa, I know we haven't talked in a while, but I didn't know you had went and got become a woman of the cloth because that was a word, Reverend Rosa. Didn't and she collared up, Carmen.
Y'all agitated me. I was like, yes, yes. And another thing, I was like,
No, I just wanted to let the water roll, baby, because that was a word. And again, this is not a call out. This conversation is a loving call in. Carmen said it, Tim said it. Welcome us home. We have ideas. We
you
have
know what? This
great
conversation reminded me of Alicia Garza, who everyone knows, but co-founder of BLM and now Black Futures Lab. Like she did a video for the AFL-CIO while we were still there for like, I think it was like for an anniversary or something. And in the video, she got asked, like, and at that time she was at the National Domestic Workers Alliance, and she got asked, do you consider yourself part of the labor movement? And she said, I wholeheartedly consider myself part of the labor movement. I don't know if the labor movement considers me part of it. And I have carried that with me since I heard her say it. And because we were in the thick of it at the AFL-CIO when she said it, it was just like, wow. I don't know the answer to that.
I don't either. And I just before I move on to the last question, I could stay here and take you guys' time up all day. But I do want to just note something that really was another arrow to my heart, Rosa, which was recovery. And I feel like I have spent and still am spending so much time recovering from almost 20 years in the labor movement to the point that when I first left labor and started my new job, my former boss asked me, was I afraid of her? And it was truly like, because I feel like I was, as you said, in labor, you're always feeling like you're someone is suspicious of you, or it's a one misstep, and it could be this and it could be that, and double crossing and triple crossing. And I didn't realize how impacted and traumatized I was until somebody else called the behavior out to me, because I was just so accustomed to having to walk that line. And so thank you for naming that and affirming that, because that's something that I have truly struggled with. And I know it's something that affects all of us as a just one little part of PTSD of the experience of working as a woman of color in that space. So thank you for your vulnerability and honesty. Um, and I have one last question, friends, and this is really Rosa, I think you touched on it. I think we've all touched on it again. Loving recommendations, but like, what does labor need to do to get it right with women? And I'm gonna say, I'm gonna come from a place, we know women of color, right? What is it gonna do? What is it? What needs to happen to not make peace, but make it right? Make it the welcoming place that we want to come back to. Make it the place where we feel like every bit of my talent and ideas I want to pour into you. And why is it important that, to your point, Rosa, doors be opened and our ideas and ideals be centered in this work for the future of labor? I'm going to start with you, Carmen Berkeley.
Woo, child. How does labor get it right for women? Well, I'll tell you, I'll try to say three things quickly. First is there are some incredible people who are they're already leaders. They're amazing. And I want to be encouraging to them to feel like they can run and win. In the state that I live in Washington, there we have all women slate running to be the leadership of the AFL-CIO, which is so encouraging to me. It lets me know that the many generations and decades of work is working. April Sims, Sharika Carter, there are other women who are running for the president and the secretary treasurer. And again, women make up more than 50% of the workforce, which means that our labor movement could actually be reflective in that same way. And out here in Washington, it's not even radical that these two Black women would be running, even though this is clearly not a state that you think of a whole bunch of Black people. But to me, that lets me know that there is a real pipeline that exists, and we should continue to nurture it. I think the second thing is there are people who have been in labor, working in unions, working in periphery organizations that have brilliant ideas that need to come to the surface because the working conditions have totally changed with COVID. I'm specifically talking about like a woman like Carol Joyner, who has been working for paid family leave since since our whole life, since like our mom's lives. And her talking about paid leave and paid sick days. I mean, folks used to not, they never really embraced it. They kind of did, like they kind of gave her a bone, they kind of gave her some money, but it's like, no, look at what happens when we have a pandemic. People need paid leave. People need sick days. Mothers, families look different now than they used to. They need things, and there are actually policy experts and economists that work in the labor movement that have been saying this stuff for years. We should probably listen to them. And I think the last thing I'll say, and I'll be quiet, is like there are 6 constituency groups that are a part of the unions and they're a part of labor, and they basically represent Black folks, Latinx folks, Asian folks, queer and trans folks, and women. And the majority of those groups, which are made up of all the unions, are predominantly run by women too. And they too come up with incredible ideas, great policies. They know what's happening in every single corner of this country, and they should be well funded. And they should be listened to because the majority of us actually engage with those organizations. Because Rosa actually touched on something, which is folks often in the labor movement go towards bread and butter, but what's bread and butter for a woman like me being able to take off work with with no punishment to take care of my family, that for me is bread and butter in as much as my paycheck. Actually, I will take flexibility at this point over getting paid a whole bunch of money because that's what I'm going to need to survive in the years of 2022, and who knows what the hell else is going on. So, it's hard for me to be specific around women because to me, it's like we already kind of run unions in a way. We're just not getting the respect that is deserved for the role that women are already playing.
Heard, Reverend Berkeley. I didn't know I was going to be on here with all these preachers today. Tam, I'm gonna let y'all agitate Rosa, so then Rosa just
No.
Yeah, I just want to build on Reverend Berkeley's words. The things that came to mind too is like invest in leadership development. Like they're worker leader to be at a press conference to do co-author an op-ed, but for some reason that person could never become the director of communications. Like, what does it mean to really build a worker-driven led movement? And I think that that's the kind of work that I'm excited about. That's why I came to the labor movement, because working people do know what's best for them. They do know the kind of organizations they want to be a part of. So let's help build that. I also think expanding what the definition of economic justice means. It's like just going back to this bread and butter issue. Like we used to talk about this all the time when like Rosa and Nadie and I were at the Painters, where that the best example I could get is like a Black worker or a Latino worker predominantly in the South. So we have undocumented workers in the South. Bread and butter issues means how safe am I between the time I leave my house until I get to my shop? That's a bread and butter issue. A bread and butter issue is how safe is my child from the time they leave my house till they get to their school. That's a bread and butter issue. Because, it's a privilege that the only thing you have to think about is how much money comes on your check. It's a privilege that you don't have to worry about, well, this is a police interaction while I make it home. It's a privilege that if my boss doesn't like me today, that they would call the federal government, the full weight of the federal government on me because I had a question about my paycheck. Immigration status is a bread and butter issue. That's how we build power for working people. And so access to abortions is a bread and butter issue that the labor movement needs to embrace and wrestle with. In 2016, when we worked at the AFL-CIO, everyone told us that this was the year. We're all in for Hills. They get it. There's no way that Donald Trump could never win. Then he won. And then they told us Black and brown girls, he took our message. I said, which message? The one about economic inequality? Because Black people in the labor movement, who you also don't organize, understand economic inequality. But when Donald Trump said that he was going to lock up all the Mexicans, we also heard white supremacy and anti-Blackness. And we understood, we did the cost-benefit analysis about our freedom in this country and said, that's not my choice. But you all who have the power and the resources and who do know, decided to say, well, let's not talk about race. How can you not talk about race when our country is built on capitalism on the backs of Black bodies? So I would say, if you could extend your vision of what economic justice looks like, what it means to use our collective power, the collective bargaining as a tool to build power for communities of color, the labor movement needs to be talking about student loan debt, right? Public sector workers are going to be, like, we need to be talking about what economic justice really means for our communities, and that's how you build a sustainable, breathing, living, growing, powerful labor movement. And I think that's what's going to bring more and more of us back home. And not just us, because we might be the strategists, the organizers, but how do you bring the workers back to the labor movement?
Tam, you said the cost benefit analysis of our freedom. And I have this little NAACP plate. It's a collection from back in the day when NAACP used to collect for the scholarship fund. I'm going to pass this around for you.
Reverend Doctor. Reverend Doctor.
Audience, you can drop your coins in. I'll put my Cash App in the chat. And it's all for Tamara. Because
all of it. All the coins.
Rosa.
I feel like I can't go after that.
You're going to take us home, Rosa. You got to take us home.
Up right here.
I mean, yeah, if there's anything, if not, because
I mean, I think Carmen and Tam, said a lot of the same, I agree with everything they said. I think the other piece is about like not being afraid to take risks, right? Like I think that there's this like hyper vigilance about like protocol or regulations or which is like all important, right? Like I mean, but I feel like we're facing conditions and challenges um, as working people that are new, and so they require new approaches and new solutions. And the only way we're going to find out which new solutions or approaches work is by trying them, right? And I think that there are people that have influence within labor institutions that are trying, but I don't know that they're always empowered, right? No, I know that they're not always empowered um, to lead on those things, right? And so, like, I think one is really embracing, I think really, um, taking note of like successes, labor successes that we've seen recently. Like, there's the teacher strikes in Chicago and in West Virginia, right? Like, there's the like TSA workers, right? That like were challenging messed up policies, like that went against their union contract, right? And like there was this tension, right, between like what members and workers were ready to do and what union institutions and leadership were ready to allow happen. And for better or for worse, it happened, right? And so I think it's like how do in those moments leaders lean in to that power and that energy that's manifested as opposed to trying to curtail because of real fear, right, of like potential consequences, right? Because we're all under attack, right, regardless of of our level of power to push back. But that level of power should mean something, right? Like, or else what's it all worth, right? And so, like, I really do think that like working people, both unionized and non-unionized workers, are really looking to see how are you going to step up and what are you going to lean into, and is are you really going to represent me, and are you really going to support me? And I think these opportunities for strikes or these opportunities for challenging employers or even politicians if necessary are going to continue to arise. And I hope that, and I think it's necessary to step up to that call, right? um, I think also just thinking longer term instead of shorter term. I think, a lot, and this is part of, the strategy, right? It's like we're being constantly attacked on all different fronts. And so that we don't have time to collect ourselves and like build a united pushback, right? Or fight back. But I do think that part of it is that we only, a lot of times within the labor movement, it's like we're just putting out fires and we're not thinking about what we're building towards longer term. And I think that's super important, like for us to have a collective vision of what it means to have a powerful labor movement in 10 years from now. Like what does that mean? What does that look like? I think is going to be extremely necessary, especially in thinking of how, you know, just even employee employer relationships are changing, thinking about how, the demographics of industries are changing. It's like really, really doing the legwork to address that, right? To really adhere to the changing needs of your base. And I think also just thinking sustainability, right? Like I think there is a shift happening within the labor movement connected to climate justice, where it's like we are, I do think that there's a difference between when we were doing sneaky shit on Keystone Pipeline to right now, right? Like I do think that there's this like moment of clarity where it's like, oh yeah, like if our world burns to shit, and like it won't matter if we can raise our contract to an additional dollar next year, right? Like so I do think that like tapping more into that like sustainability questions, and how we play a role in crafting that narrative, right? I think it's going to be extremely important. Also, just part of our responsibility as a movement to also like do the education process for those at our base that don't understand that connection, right? Because not everybody does, but it's like, how do we start to weave um, all these different issues that have either a direct or indirect impact in our ability to build power and actually change things? I think are all things that are super possible. um, Definitely not easy, but are possible, that I think are going to be necessary for a healthy future of our labor movement.
I can't leave without saying thank you to you, though, Tiffany. I'm so sorry for jumping in, but as I was sitting here listening to everybody, and I was looking at you, you know, I don't know if your audience knows that you were the vice president of UFCW Local 400, and that's how I know you. That's how we know you. And I think what's important for folks to know is that there are a lot of unions. There's not just one mega one. There's many, and that you are a representation of somebody who was doing your job. You were doing incredible work. I remember there'd be times we'd ask you for stuff and you're like, well, yeah, I'm going to do it. And we're also organizing these workers in Virginia or Maryland or wherever you were at. And you still showed up in the spaces that the three of us were in, and probably many others that we don't even know about. So just to, you know, directly answer your question, like what can labor do to get right with women, is to say thank you to women like you know, who even remember that those of us who used to work there exist. And thank you for what you did for UFCW and for other Black women and other women of color who just needed to see representation. You know, like they needed to see their mom and their auntie and their cousin as like the vice president of something. That's a really big deal, Tiffany. So thank you for what you did too.
Carmen, you know I'm a crybaby. All of these women, everybody that really knows me in real life knows I'm a crybaby. I cry at the drop of the hat, and that is really special, friend, and I appreciate that. And I miss labor. I miss our times together. I miss everything that we built. I am lucky enough to still live with a labor organizer, and so you know I hear things here and there, and it keeps me connected. But the work that we did together, the four of us and all the men and women and folks who haven't been named today, will always be some of the most important work of my life. And I mean that. And you guys will all, this crew of people, this support system. And it wasn't just trauma, it was also an incredible amount of love, an incredible amount of love and support. And you got this, and group text, and like, no matter what it takes, Carmen, this shit is going to be successful. No matter what it takes, Rosa, we're going to win. Right. And like, that's how we got through it. That's how we're still here with the shred of mental health that we still have after it all. But like I told these women, what you don't know, audience, is before this call started, obviously we all know each other from work and life, but I thank them because these are also some of my heroes. These are people that have been on the front line, who they mentioned we met on the front line, and who have remained on the front line. So in an effort to get myself together and stop talking, I'm going to push it back to y'all and ask you, in that spirit of still being on the front line, Tam, you're at Demand Justice. Rosa, we know you're at NDWA. And Carmen, you're at Group Health. Can you tell the folks where to find you, how to follow your work, what's going on with you? Start with you, Tam.
Yeah, so by the time this is out into the world, we have just come through the confirmation of Judge Kataji Brown Jackson. She is the first Black woman ever nominated and confirmed to the Supreme Court. She's also the first public defender, which is really important. And so at Demand Justice, www.demandjustice.org, you can learn more about our work. I think that being able to connect the labor fight and the fight for our courts is really important. As a former organizer, we would fight for so many things, and then a court decision could make or break it. that's why so many of the things that we do now, the Supreme Court and the federal courts have made it harder and harder for us to organize. They made it harder for us to vote. They made it harder for us to have autonomy over our bodies. And so the organizer in me, who believes in radical change for working people, believes that our federal courts need to also be a tool for us. So please check us out at demandjustice.org.
Thank you, Tam. Carmen, what's going on out in Seattle?
Boo, 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 boo. Actually, today I'm in Pasco, Washington, which I love. I work in philanthropy now, and it is amazing to take all of the skills that I learned from every job I had, and to be able to support every type of person, and particularly BIPOC, queer, and trans folks here in Washington. So for folks that are newer organizations that are, thinking about politics, organizations that are run by and have boards that are diverse, you all should go to grouphealthfoundation.org and check us out. We actually have an open call for proposals right now. It's going to be an awesome opportunity for some organizations. And personally, I'm still out here living and dreaming. So I guess I'm the most fun on Instagram. So you can follow me on Carmen Spin Diego on Instagram, which is also my DJ name. But my job is Group Health Foundation, and they're pretty great.
Go DJ. That's my DJ. Go DJ. Rosa, that's my DJ. NDWA, do you have a call to action? Do we need to be signing a petition? Is there a politician to call? You need us in the streets? What are we doing, Rosa? You're muted, Rosa. Rosa, you're on mute, babe.
I got too excited. Always, there's all the petitions, all the calls to action. You can definitely follow us on our website, domesticworkers.org, on Insta, Facebook, and Twitter, also at Domestic Workers. We always try to uplift different domestic workers and tell their stories on social media. We've been drilling down super heavy on uplifting the need for Build Back Better. Lord knows what's going to end up happening with that. But I think definitely just uplifting the need for worker protections and a safety net for workers, especially those that don't really have access to anything else, and that it shouldn't be tied to immigration status. So all those fights and updates on those campaigns would be posted on our website and our social media handles. And yeah, I think also be kind and just to your domestic workers. So if you have a nanny, if you have a home care worker, or if you have a house cleaner, pay them well, and lots of gratitude to all of them, because they're doing that for you and they're doing it for themselves and their families at home too.
Thank you for reminding us to be kind, each and every one of you. Rosa Lozano, Carmen Berkeley, Tamara Brummer. I really cannot say thank you enough on behalf of the Frontline. This has been more than I could have dreamed for a conversation, and I really appreciate your time. Thank you for joining your Frontline family. You're always welcome here, and we love and appreciate you so much, friends. Good night to you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Night.
And what a great conversation, right? I'm a little teary-eyed. I'm glad I didn't put on any makeup, but we've been talking about labor and unions over here on the Frontline for the last few weeks. So if you want to hear more, you could head over to Twitter and listen to our conversation that we had last week with workers from Starbucks, New York Times, Tech, and Politics and Prose, the first bookstore to be organized in Washington, D.C. It's available for replay right now. As always, friends, thank you for joining your family over here on the Frontline. Again, if it was your first time, we welcome you and hope to see you back. If you've been rocking with us all along, it's wonderful to see you, fam. Take good care. We'll see you soon on the Frontline.
Profound changes in the way we think and act must take place if we are to create a loving culture.